Let me know when you're ready.
We're ready.
Oh, we're going?
Yep.
Okay, all right, good morning. It is Wednesday, March 12th. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and we are starting out this morning with the salt bill. We have a new draft and pledge council with us to walk us through it. Good morning.
Good morning, this is Michael Grady. As council, you should have a draft that says 4.4 of March 12th. Date and 7:13 a.m. timestamp. Yes, that's okay.
Yes, yep.
You will see different color coding throughout. The yellow is the changes that were made in the previous draft, but I never walked through them with you. So I left them in there, and then there's gray highlighting, which indicates additional instruction I received for changes to the bill. What would you like me to do or highlight?
I think since we haven't walked through the yellow or the gray, I think it makes sense to do both if that is okay.
So. Let me come. So, there were some changes that were suggested by the Agency of Natural Resources, and much of the yellow is related to those requested changes on page 1, line 17 or 18. There was, you'll see it says compensation applied salt. It previously said applies or supervises others who apply salt. The concept of the master is being fleshed out a little bit more. You see that there is that definition of a master commercial salt applicator that's being added in subdivision 3. You will see that there is no longer a definition of a municipal salt applicator because they are no longer in this part of the bill. They are not in the program. They are now in session law directing AOT to include as part of the local curriculum training of those municipal salt applicators. So they're moved out of the statute into session. Okay. Moving down, you can move into 1352, the chloride contamination reduction program. The first change on page 2, line 15, that is again removing master or municipal salt applicators in the state. So municipal salt applicators are not covered in the training program. Then on page 2, line 17 and 18, it had previously said a competitively selected third-party vendor. The agency asked that competitively selected be struck. They do have opportunity under administrative bulletin 3.5 not to have to go to a bid. So I think they're probably trying to maintain as many alternatives as they can. And so that's why they asked for competitively selected to be struck. Page 2, line 20, again, municipal salt applicators are being struck. They're not currently in the program. Page 3, subdivision B3. Again, municipal salt applicators are being struck. And then at the end of that subdivision, which will say it previously said and required submission to the Agency of Natural Resources. And that was removed at the agency's request. But the chair asked that there be language that say any other factors that the Secretary of Natural Resources deems necessary for the purposes of the program.
There's going to be some record keeping going to A&R elsewhere for the program. Recall. Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about the municipality being struck by going into session law, so I understand it?
So A&R had recommended that they not be part of the program because they're already part of the program that A&R and AOT run. I think it's jointly. It's the A&R comes up with best management practices for stormwater management of roads, and that's AOT does the training. And so that's what they will prefer to address the municipal salt applicators through that program and not through this program.
So that, we heard from VLCT yesterday, and they basically said that they like municipalities to be involved to the point where they get the liability exemption.
Well, the chair asked me to add language and there's language in the section law portion. You all should recall, and I'm surprised DLC did not recall, BC did not recall this, but they have sovereign immunity. Vermont is one of the few states where municipalities still retain sovereign immunity from tort liability.
You should watch their testimony. Wow.
There is a provision in law 24 VSA 901A, which states that if a municipal employee is sued in tort, that the municipality must step in and represent the municipal employee, and in so doing has to waive their sovereign immunity defense. But that's what the language later in the bill addresses. And so an overarching concern about liability of the municipality, they're just not. They're just not.
Wow, I wish you had been here yesterday, or that one of us had thought about that, and that they were. Good, you did? Oh, you said
Well,
something.
I figured they had.
Yeah.
And I went back and I read the case on 901A, that the municipal employees are the lead actor, and it's very clear. It says, and it was a 2020 case, and it hasn't been overturned, so.
So funny, because yesterday I was like, this never came up with anyone else. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that was why.
why,
That comes up, so, okay.
that was very interesting. Okay,
So, moving down to C1, that line 9. The agency, it first strikes municipal salt applicator, and then there was the annual certification for the program for the commercial salt applicator. The agency asked that that be once every other year. On page 4, line 17 and 18, this is the reporting requirement that the chair referenced earlier. A certified salt operator shall submit an annual summary of the total winter salt usage to the Secretary of Natural Resources. On page 5, under subdivision D, there is no longer a subdivision D4. There's been a directive for the agency to develop salt reduction targets to guide the agency of natural resources in measurably reducing fluoride levels in surface waters and groundwater. That was removed. And then there had been a requirement to annually report to you.
I lost track.
We are right before 1353, so we're on page 5. What I'm discussing is language that is no longer in the bill that was omitted. There had been a subdivision 4 and a subdivision 5. Subdivision 4 related to developing salt reduction targets by A&R. Subdivision 5 was an annual report to the General Assembly, giving the findings of the assessment of the nature, scope, and magnitude of associated impacts of salt on surface water, etc. That agency asked for that to be removed, and it was removed. Should I go forward?
unless there's questions. I think we're good.
Okay, page 5, line 14, commercial, after commercial salt applicator, certified municipal salt applicator was struck. That C change was made on page 5, line 15, after commercial salt applicator, but it's not highlighted. C change page 5, line 20 municipal salt applicator was removed. The change page 6, lines 6 and 7. And again, page 6, line 9, same change. Certified municipal salt applicator was removed. And then page 6, line 15 and 16, this was just a clarification of how that rebuttable presumption would work. It was for the TMDL under the chapter, which is chapters of, is the chapter for water resources. And then, for the requirements of an MS4 under section 1264. So that was just, adding some cross-referencing. Moving on from there, you can go to D on the next page. And then first change was on page 7, line 2, it's not highlighted, but after commercial salt applicator, municipal salt applicator was struck, and then the language on page 7, line 4 and 5 about keeping a record shall be consistent with the requirements determined by the secretary under the subchapter. Moving on from there, you get to the storage and disposal of salt, which is, by the way, why I was across the hall for so long. And,
Thank you.
and how to fund the cover requirements that are in currently page 7, line 11. What was struck on that first line was reference to private contractors. They're no longer being required to cover their storage. And the agency doesn't want to go look for them either. And then page 7, line 8A. This is the requirement that all state, municipal, and privately owned facilities for the storage of salt or sand, salt and sand mixtures that are 100 yards of surface water or drinking water storage be covered, monitored before 2030, and that all other state, municipal, and privately owned facilities where the storage of salt or salt and sand mixtures be under cover on for 2035. And then page 8, line 3 through 8, that's just the cover requirement for sand that is not mixed with salt, and that's within 100 yards of the surface water or drinking water source. That's 2030.
Can I stop you? I'm sorry.
Mhm.
So the salt mixed, salt mixed with sand.
Yeah.
And pouch. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't hearing where the salt was. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
And then, the page 8, line 9 through 12, the secretary needs to identify funds or funding sources that may be used to grant funds to facilities subject to the cover requirements, and that would allow priority for grant awards to be provided. The salt shed projects in municipalities with fewer than 1,200 residents. So the committee across the Office of Transportation, they just heard from Pete Laflamme. Pete said that they, I didn't hear all of Pete's testimony. I will just summarize what I heard. Basically, he said that they would rather report back on the scope of the problem and identify what needs to be done, including the funding. And so that's what I heard. I didn't hear him specifically say they don't support coverage. I heard him say that they will first want to assess and report on the problem and then summarize the cost. The committee across the hall wants this to be prioritized. If it's a mandate, wants it to be prioritized as a funding source. So it's not an unfunded mandate.
Understandable. Do you have a sense of whether or not their amendment is going to be, well, we should just have them in to talk about their amendment at some point.
So I drafted an amendment for them this morning, which I just handed out, but I was drafting it while they were talking to Pete. So by the time I got back with my amendment, it it was not complete.
Oh,
What I had drafted was to make funding of coverage a priority, tier 2 priority from the recommendations of the Clean Water Fund Board going forward fiscal year 27 and into the future. And they were talking about what I drafted said that there would at least be $1 million that would be recommended each year for that. The chair said, we don't know how much is needed because we don't know what we don't know. And then that's, he said, well, what they do want, they'll probably include some language about prioritization under the Clean Water Fund, but they want to report back from A&R. They didn't say by when, but to assess the scope of the problem and recommend a funding amount necessary to assist municipalities in financing coverage.
okay, well, I have questions, but I suppose we'll deal with those when we have the opportunity to talk about the amendment more formally, so,
I mean, this bill's going to appropriation, so you do have another week.
yeah, okay, fair. Senator Williams, you have a question?
So I apologize, but you were talking about, you didn't hear Pete's testimony, Pete? I'm not sure.
Pete McClellan is the director of the water district.
So I don't know, Joan fiscal, you ever give us a fiscal note on this at some point?
I mean, we have one,
But it sounds like it just changed.
it's true, probably needs change, but,
Well, it sounds like what they want is a report back on potential for how much it would cost to cover all the salt streams, right?
So apparently they have done some. It's not on the ground. He said they didn't actually go out on the ground, but they used some data analysis to determine that there's 20 sheds that are within 100 feet of the surface water. But they would need to confirm that,
Mostly municipal.
yes.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
so if they're sheds, they're covered.
Well, I call it a shed, but salt storage.
Okay.
And
Good distinction.
And one of the things that they is an alternative instead of coverage is remove it. And whether or not over time that's an alternative for any of the 20 that are identified, confirmed. So that,
Yeah, that's cheaper.
Mhm.
Why would they have them uncovered anyway? Doesn't salt, I mean, since the salt, it gets.
Helps, you gotta break the salt.
Pete said that coverage of salt is smart because you pay a lot for it, and if it gets rained on, it dissolves.
It
Literally goes down.
Coverage seems like such a bad idea.
Yeah, you're trying to help me.
So I think you still have that dynamic between you and the committee across the hall about funding, determining how much funding and prioritizing funding for municipalities.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about this, but would it be better to say they have to be moved unless they are covered? And the other part about covering is covered to affect what? And by that, I mean truly covered, is there still ability for there to come in and well off that? But you know, is it covered in such a way that's going to prevent runoff? Is really what we're looking for.
Mm.
Maybe we need to say it. Well, maybe we should lead with moved unless.
Moved or covered in order to prevent runoff. Cause yeah, 'cause I mean, you could cover carp, that might not be very effective.
Any construction now has to be within, can't be within 100 feet of a wetland, right? And if it's a body of water, river, that erosion is gonna keep eating away at that 100 feet, so I think probably a lot of them have been thinking about moving their
Hmm.
sheds, but they haven't had a reason to.
I think there are standards for coverage.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
there are standards for coverage, but that's only for constructing a structure. I think the question is a good one, Snre. You might need to define cover.
Oh, dang. Well, that's something that, if we want, I would still love to be able to like move this today, so if we.
We're kind of moving, we're kind of.
Exactly, we've got to think about defining.
Well, and on page 8, line 5, there's that language, managed to contain runoff.
Mhm.
So that might get to what your concerns were, Senator. Is that in both sections?
Yeah. It's not.
Yeah, it's not in paragraph 3, it's only in paragraph 4.
Okay.
And so maybe we could just say moved further than 100 yards or covered and managed to contain runoff. 100 feet,
Oh, 100 yards.
No.
100 yards,
It is.
yeah,
Well, 300.
do it simply fast, maybe, but otherwise.
If, well, no, if, can you say what you said again, Senator?
That on bottom of page 7. That the storage that are within 100 yards of a surface or drinking water source. Be under cover. And manage to contain runoff. Or moved further than 100 yards. Or however, like, you wanna put first or second, but getting those two concepts within. Covered and managed to contain runoff. Or moved further than 100 yards from a water source.
Okay, so,
That clunky.
no, it's not, but the second part of that subdivision 3 says that all facilities need to be covered by 2035. So, are you?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Even if they're more than 100 yards.
Mhm.
I see, right, okay.
Mhm.
Do you still want that, or?
No, I guess then it doesn't matter. It's, then I guess it implies that all of them, it doesn't imply, it says all of them have to be covered even if they're further away.
Right,
So, yeah, I guess moving doesn't.
give another, yeah, go ahead.
Back to the 100 yards, 300 feet, I know a lot of municipalities, town garages, their lot's not 300 feet. So if we tell them they have to be 100 yards away, they're gonna have to go procure another piece of land and put it on.
Well, that's part of what Pete was saying.
Right. 300 feet is bigger than most town garage areas where they got the salt and trucks.
But if they're not near a water source, then.
They are,
that doesn't-
most of them are.
Most of them are.
No?
I have a town in my district, Rygate. They had an uncovered salt and it ended up in nearby aquifer wells.
Yeah.
It's a problem. It
Yeah.
can-
They got.
And it's not near water,
No.
it's deep in.
Yeah.
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 That's interesting.
We're creating a problem for the municipality. Problem we got to yards away.
Well, and perhaps this is something that
Yeah.
the transportation's amendment with a study to see what the scope of the problem is could address.
Yeah, because maybe it's not even just covering them, maybe it's also the base part of it.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, the runoff.
It's
Well, that's
just
the
putting
thing,
it on
like-
bare ground, it goes in.
So I wonder if it is. Worth saying that. Even by 2035, they need to be covered and the runoff needs to be contained.
That's
that-
that's what.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Does that,
if you erect a structure that prevents all liquid, all rain from getting on it,
yeah,
you're not going to have a problem,
Right.
even if it's on dirt.
Isn't managed to contain runoff? That's the language that you want.
yeah, but for that, in the. That should apply to both, or at least by 2035,
Okay.
right? Does that,
Does,
Mhm.
for the salt?
Oh, that's with sand not mixed with salt,
right,
so we want it to apply
To
to.
both.
To both, yeah.
is. Is that a change that we can make right now, or if we moved this, we could say together
Yeah,
with that,
contingent on that change.
contingent on that change, okay. Okay, and but everyone's okay with that, okay. Okay. Let me know if you have, okay.
Okay, moving forward from there. On page 8, line 18, in the report. There was the striking of reference to the municipal application of salt. And then on page 9, this is to reflect the first yellow line on before November 1, 26. A&R in collaboration with AOT identifies and makes changes to the Vermont local roads curriculum needed to support municipal salt applicators, meeting the purposes of the act, including training for best management practices for spreading salt on roads, parking lots, and sidewalks.
That was my attempt at beefing up the language for what they need to include. Okay.
And then you have the definition of municipal salt applicator that's moved here. And then you have the liability language on page 9, line 10, notwithstanding 24.901A, which says the municipality represents the municipal employee that have to drop sovereign immunity. The municipal employee shall not be subject to any civil liability for acts or omissions. The employee conducts this municipal salt applicator if they completed the local roads curriculum, providing best management practices for spreading salt on sidewalks in that calendar year. If alleged damages are caused solely by hazards from snow or ice, and any failure or delay in removing or mitigating the hazard as a result of the applicator's implementation of the best management practices learned under the Vermont local roads curriculum.
So,
Sorry, do we need to include anything about gross negligence? Except in the case of gross negligence or something,
I can add that if you would like, sure.
just thinking back to the language that we have for the other part of the program, which I was just reviewing. For the sake of the judiciary. But go ahead.
the employee or agent of a town or a municipality, but does not include state employees, so. This would include school district employees then, because a school district is a municipality.
Technically, they're a municipality, yeah.
Yeah, so do they participate in the municipal roads program?
I doubt that they do.
Don't believe they do.
Would you kick them out if they wanted to?
It depends on, some municipalities actually sand and salt for the school district. So-
Yes,
So
that's
they would
correct.
receive it, if they hire a private contractor.
Would do it themselves.
Or do it themselves, yeah.
Yeah, or again, Craig would be trans, some of the municipalities, Parks and Rec staff might be doing that. Is what I heard from our Mountain Roads folks as well.
I think it's a mix. Some school districts it's private, some it's their own staff, and some it might be the municipal staff.
Right.
So if it is their own staff and they wanted to do this program, would you be? Like if it's a school district employee who's working for, just pick my own district, Middlebury High School, would they be allowed to do your municipal roads program to get this training?
Not sure I can answer that question from Finance Net and Mountain Roads program, but I think the language that's in here would allow A&R and V-Trans to make sure that it's covered.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would too, so I just wanna make sure you guys are okay with that, cause they have huge parking lots. A lot of the high schools, so wanting to make sure that they get the opportunity to participate.
Yeah, I think it's really a matter of funding source that we might be tapping into, collaborating with A&R, if it's not the federal source we have now. That restricts us from the sort of bracket we're operating under.
One potential solution would be that we could say in terms of the regular program. That for who was eligible, because I think it said private contractors, but we could expand who's eligible to anyone, private contractors, and anyone who is not eligible for the Vermont roads curriculum. You see what I'm saying then? Yeah, that way.
I just wonder if that opens, I'm trying to think of who anyone might be,
Right.
like an unintended consequence of saying anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can keep it, if you could just verify that a school district employee could do it. We could always do an amendment later,
Let's do an amendment.
as we have time, but,
I can verify right now that under our current funding, the understanding is that it cannot.
oh, under your current funding, so you would have to use a different funding source, I see,
I'm not so worried about unintended consequences with the people, you know, expanding the who's eligible, because we've already said private contractors, and that is
that's true.
a very large universe.
So where are you suggesting that?
Well, I thought it would be. Well, actually, I guess it would be page 1
Under commercials.
under commercial salt applicator, that it could say anyone who is not eligible for the Vermont roads curriculum.
So you're now mixing the liability protection you're providing for the private applicators with municipal sovereign immunity.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
But and legally, a school district is a municipality, and so are water districts and all, you remember from.
Yes, I
lots-
do.
All the things,
All the things.
there are lots of little entities.
Maybe this is a point about which we just put a pin in it, we flag this as an issue, and then we can either. Have an amendment or. Do nothing, but yeah, cause I hate to leave them out,
Or tell. them
but it is,
figure
right,
out
exactly,
the-
please figure out. And I think that would be a reasonable thing to say. Cause it's gonna take so much time, and I also acknowledge that you are overtime right now, so we are very close. Can we burn, Senator Williams, is it?
So just
Okay.
real quick,
Yeah,
didn't the New Hampshire, green snowball, didn't they have a contractor doing all the certification? They
Running
didn't use the.
their own.
Correct. I mean, I'm thinking that when we keep adding things to their plate, that they hired a contractor.
Yeah, well, let's keep chewing on it and we'll come back to it. I think it's a good question. But we're almost done.
So the next changes are about the appropriations. First, there's the language about how they're going to solicit interest from third party vendors. There's a lot of language there that, they basically just want to solicit and submit to you a fee for the charge in January 15th, 2026. And then their appropriation for the classified position, you had it at 125, they want it to be 150. And then they wanted 250 for the purpose of contracting with an external organization to establish a certification training.
Yeah, so my question on the 250 is, if they're not doing bids until January. Do they need the full 250?
Well, this is to establish the program. So it's not necessarily that for the third party vendor.
Well, it says for contracting with an external organization to establish a certification training.
So it's not actually administer it, it's to.
Oh, just to create it?
Yeah.
Damn, I mean,
Stand it up.
that seems like a lot, and also they're not gonna get that ready for at least partway through the year, so.
Mhm. Wonder. This part is also gonna be reviewed by appropriations. Yes.
But they also need to know they have money, because if we to hire contractors, the current there's gonna be X, and then we put agency needs to know it has the money.
Mhm,
Because if we break it up into 2 years, which we might otherwise do, then people know they have it, so they'll be a bit on it.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
I'm okay with keeping it for now, we can,
Right, but you'll be there to
yeah,
ask about it.
we'll talk more about
That
it.
seems like a lot to me.
I agree. Okay. So I think that's it, yes, so,
That's it, although you do want changes. Specifically on the coverage. You want it to basically say manage to contain runoff by the relevant dates for each category.
mhm,
And then you want a gross negligence exception to the liability exception.
right,
Is that proven covered in anything, gross negligence exception?
But remember, you're basically saying municipal employee that can be liable is not gonna be liable. And so you can say when they're gonna be liable
I see,
again.
okay.
yeah, right, yeah.
So,
The
It's like
exemption
nested.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. All right, team, are we in a place where you're feeling okay to vote? Okay. So I think we need a motion to, we probably need to do this in two parts, yes? So one is to amend the bill in version 4.4 with the changes discussed. And then we'll vote on the recommended updated version.
So I will move that we approve. Draft 4.4 with this discussed changes. Of S29.
Okay, so doing this vote twice, right? So, all right, go ahead, Sue.
Okay, Senator Bennett, yes. Senator Baumgartner,
Yes.
Senator Hardy,
Yes.
Senator Williams, no. Senator Watson,
Yes.
we were 1-0.
Okay, and so is there a motion to recommend this to the floor?
Yes. I recommend, wait, do we have to do this twice?
We amended the draft to be the version.
So
And now this is a.
pass it, move passage of 4.4 as amended.
Okay, go ahead.
That's what we just voted on, but
Senator Bennett, yes. Senator Baumgartner,
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
yes.
Senator Williams, no. Senator Watson.
Yes. Okay, very good, and I just asked for Senator Birch to get here. Okay, I mean, I assume that I will be reporting this unless somebody else wants to.
You should do it, we've spent so much time
Yeah,
on it, should
I
be
know.
Gary's job.
Yeah, happy to report it, so I'll put that on my radar. And anticipating that we'll have Senator Birchall joining us shortly, but maybe let's take a break until he arrives. We're all live. Okay, all right, so just a quick break here, for joining the Senator Birchlick with an amendment to S50, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, tell us about what you've got.
Okay. So this is 3 instances of amendment for the work you've done on this 50, which I appreciate. Thank you for moving on that. The first one is language about how you just list 25 kilowatts or less, or up to 25 kilowatts. You can go one way, 25 kilowatts is involved if you're allowed, and if you do it the other way, 25 kilowatt would not be allowed, you'd only be able to go to 24.9. Not a big deal, but
It's good.
Yeah,
Whole number.
yeah, hold on.
Well, it was inconsistent, right? Like one place said up to, and I
Yeah, so this,
was unclear
this,
what.
yeah, clarifies in those three different instances that it's 25 kilowatts and less. So that's the first instance, but which is all the different times that that's was found. And then the second one is basically, when you're going through the registration process, it is just a registration process. You get the registration, if I remember correctly, 10 days. You don't have to wait even that long, you just send in the paperwork, wait 10 days, then install the system, and then it's a legal installation. We had an instance after registration happened before, where at least one that I know of in East Montpelier, and just anecdotally heard of others where they installed it within the right of way or within what would be the normal setback requirements for a town. And then they said, well, sorry, like I have a legal state permit to put it there. You can't make me take it down. So like I looked at Montpelier's regs last night, they have a, certain amount of feet away from the property line for any structure. And then they have a regulation about height, like the higher it is, the further it has to be away. So you could put in 7.5 kilowatt tracker, which is about 20 feet in the air, right on the property line. There's an issue about whether the tracker itself goes over the line, but let's take that out of effect. So you can have it very close to the property line, which normally would not be allowed under bylaws. So this is make sure that you have to follow the bylaws about setbacks, even though you're getting a registration. So that if it happens, the abutted landowner or the town can say, we know you got this CPG basically, but you have to move it back and be or whatever. So that's the issue there.
So we're talking local zoning. So we don't make a state fund, they have to
Yeah.
comply with the local.
But yeah, if there is local zoning and the local, by not all towns, like I looked in my town and I didn't see a setback for all property lines. I think they just do it on a case by case basis. So this is like, if they had a setback requirement for the solar system.
I was doing my research because I gotta report that bill today,
Yeah,
and I found that case where they actually had a.
Yeah.
It was on the internet. So.
so I thought that we just want people to, at least I want people to be supportive of solar installations, and I don't want people, getting mad about the solar installation just because somebody installed it too close to the property line, or using an excuse to say, I'm gonna put the solar on the shed. The shed is not a shed, it's holding up these solar panels so I can go through the registration process, and now I have a shed that normally wouldn't meet the setback requirements, but is because it's a solar system.
Yeah,
So on that setback, I mean, let's say you got a rotator. Is it the base that matters, or is it the wingspan?
My
How does that
understanding is
work?
the
The
wingspan,
wingspan, okay.
that you can't have things that go over the property line. That there is that vertical plane.
There are air rights.
Yeah.
it's not the apple tree.
I was saying something like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
So just a procedure question, I'm still gonna be bored, you're gonna amend this on the floor?
Yeah, that's my correct.
Okay.
So the intent, of course, was to hear from Senator Perchlik now, see how the committee feels about the amendment before, on the floor. Yes.
I have a question for just a little thing, so in the first instance of amendment, or the first through fourth, you're adding the language of 25 kilowatts and less. And then in the other amended, that is 25 kilowatts or less. So I don't know if and or make a difference, but if we're trying to be consistent, we might wanna pick and or.
Good point, yeah, that would be a question for Alan, yeah.
But you brought up originally, when Maryland was saying it should be,
Yeah, and less seems,
see.
how could it be full,
Right, exactly, it seems like it would be more than that, yeah.
right? Can't be 25 kilowatts and less. That's tough.
So that would be,
Or if it's a,
and I think you can just go ask Ellen to change that
Okay.
on a draft, because it's your amendment, right?
Yeah, I might
Yeah.
have, so this is something you can potentially resolve before.
Yeah.
Or,
I'll check with her before I submit the final,
so,
unless there's a reason she wanted to say amendments.
Yeah.
But if it's so, I agree, we should put that down here.
It might just be confusing for regulators. If
That was on
they
page
like, wait,
16.
when is it or when is it?
yeah,
Yeah.
The inside here. Changing ands to ors.
it's not fewer.
It's not that. It's not that. 25 kilowatts or fewer.
But
Is
then-
that what you thought? It was just-
Well, no, I just checked, I didn't know, anyway, I did do the mental check.
Once a year, we have to have that debate on. So
Actually. Just to clarify.
the third instance is an issue that has come up, I think I had a bill on this, I think this committee might have looked at this language last year. But
We
We
did.
brought it to the house, we did talk about it a little bit.
It appeared in a draft. And then that draft got amended, so it was briefly in a bill and then it wasn't. So that's how I remember it, but
So this is the issue with all net metering, but since this bill deals with the registration, and I think just dealing it with the systems that go through the registration process is fine. And that is when you get a registration, I don't know if you've looked at the registration form when you talked about this bill, but there's a checkbox that you have to make whether you want to retain ownership of the RECs, the renewable energy credits, or you want them to go to the utility. The Public Utility Commission has decided if whatever box you check, that's an irrevocable decision. And so that they have said that you just can't change it. You made a mistake, too bad, you're living with that for the life of the system, 20, 30 years. I think that's a little too stringent for some just members of the public that are filling out these forms, even though they have some explanations there and saying it's irrevocable, but. I had an example of a electrician who doesn't do a lot of solar systems, is a master electrician, did a solar system. Thought, well, of course, they would want to keep the RECs, why would they give them away? Like, didn't know anything about the financial impact that would cause. But then they just thought, when they found out the financial impact, they thought, surely I can change it. And then they were really surprised when the board said, no, you can't change it. That's a loss of that 4 cents per kilowatt hour for the life of the system. So that customer was pretty mad and basically wanted the electrician to pay him that 4 cents for the rest of the life of the system. And so this would allow these smaller systems to change one time if they make a mistake. And I presented it as an amendment to the House Energy Committee last year. They were supportive, but it was kind of like timeline, so they were gonna send a letter to the PUC, because the PUC in the room said they were supportive of a one-time change. But they said they were gonna go through a net metering rule change, they said, if you send us a letter, we'll make the change, the letter never got sent, so they didn't make the change when they updated the rule. So this would correct the problem.
and just for these very small systems, which I would
Yes.
suppose are perhaps. More prone to an error, and that's sort of what this is intended to. Give grace for.
Because there's just, you check a box and you send it in, there's no chance, but if you're going through the full 248 process, you're
Yeah.
gonna have not a lot.
Yeah.
That's,
we
you don't
allow
check
for
a
it.
box.
Okay. I'll just say I am fine with all 3 of these edits. Other thoughts from the committee? Okay, great, so I don't think we need any vote particularly on this. Do we?
That's good, because then you can say, instead of saying the committee voted.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
Is that a mobile?
let's do this, yeah, we can do this a straw poll, that's fine. So, yeah, if this is just a straw poll, we don't need a motion or anything, so, all in favor of the amendment? Okay, that is everybody, fantastic, so we'll have one of us stand up to say maybe, so.
Okay, so I'll work with Ellen, but maybe make that other. change.
Yeah, the orders.
Yeah, the orders.
Right, it's like, what is it, a rhyme and sum, because you're like 25, 24, like, it's a cascading with decreasing amount, so. Anyway, all right. Thank you.
The visuals and
Thank you for nerding out with me for a hot second.
I have a question.
Yes,
So if we see the technology's improving, we're getting smaller, more efficient
Yeah.
panels. If everybody that had a net metering project decided today to change their panels. Do we have any provision in there for what are we gonna do with them now?
oh, like what happens to them? Well, and I think, did you have some conversation with, Mr. Sterling about panel recycling and the end of life stuff, so I think that's what. would
When I was
apply.
always, when I was on the regional planning commission, I always asked, when we had a 248 project,
Mhm,
what's your deactivation?
mhm.
So, and nobody had ever considered
Mhm.
that, so. At some point, I mean, if we took every home net metering panel and put it into, we'd have to have another management system. I'm just concerned about it, I'm wondering if we already have some provision covered.
I don't think that we do, but we can flag that. And,
You did
It's-
give me a,
yeah,
it
yeah,
can be recycled every night, but nobody does it.
Yeah, tell you, I wonder about the battery we have.
yeah, I think
I wonder about what's gonna happen when I have to get that.
I think I would suspect that there's more concern about end of life for batteries than for solar panels, particularly because of
Right.
the risks, yeah. But, and it's not the same as like needing a decommissioning fund like for nuclear, which is a whole different set of issues if you don't properly, manage it post.
So a lot of these companies, they set up the solar and then they sell
Yeah.
it to somebody else, so.
Yeah, well, so we're gonna move on, that's okay, but thank you for raising that. So we are joined by James Duffy from the Joint Fiscal Office, welcome. And so yeah, to walk us through, I actually have not seen the fiscal note yet, but we'll do it now.
Author
We'll walk through it. Is this something that we have digitally or?
Share this on the screen up front if that's all right.
Yeah, no, but you have to sour, what bill?
Oh, sorry, this is for a 65.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'll join the meeting. Oh, could you please forward the Zoom invitations?
What do you think, team, about taking just like a
Yeah,
4-minute break?
that'd be great.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Team, we're ready to go? Okay, all right, so let's go back live. Are we live now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
Right.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Watson and committee members. For the record, my name is James Duffy, fiscal analyst with the Legislative Joint Fiscal Office. Here today to walk through a fiscal note that JFO has compiled or has drafted for S65, an act relating to energy efficiency utility jurisdiction. I have it up on the screen behind me, and I believe folks have access to it through the committee website. So I'll just start by saying, JFO's traditional area of expertise is to comment on and analyze direct impacts of legislation on the state budget. So it includes direct state expenditures, appropriations, that sort of thing. And so this fiscal note takes the pieces of S65 that have a foreseeable direct impact on the state budget and really spends most of its time talking about those. JFO recognizes that there are other Vermont-wide and economy-wide questions about, the impacts of this bill that are certainly of interest. This fiscal note does not go into detail on those. However, some of the dynamics at play between demand and retail prices that apply for the state budget are still applicable to those broader statewide and economy-wide questions. So our hope is in going through these direct impacts to the state can also help guide the broader conversation as well. So that being said, I'll dive in here. Chair Watson, would you like me to go through those top line? Sure. Okay, so the bill does a number of things, but the top line kind of highlights that JFO elevated in this fiscal note is expanding, obviously, energy efficiency utility jurisdiction to include greenhouse gas emission reductions and electrification projects. The bill would also elevate the priority placed on greenhouse gas emission reductions and electrification projects within electric energy efficiency utility program delivery. This was referred to as EEUs. It would increase efficiency utilities flexibility to use the energy efficiency charge revenue for projects that reduce total energy use across fuel types. So right now, the energy efficiency charge is largely limited to projects that reduce electricity use. This bill would increase the flexibility of those energy efficiency utilities to use that revenue on other projects, such as fuel switching. And then finally, we highlighted that the bill also caps the annual revenue raised by the energy efficiency charge to an equivalent to the inflation adjusted 2026 efficiency budget. So it's, so I'll shortly go into those direct state fiscal impacts, potential direct state fiscal impacts that JFO has identified. But I think one top line policy implication of the bill that JFO thought we could highlight is, so the bill maintains these efficiency utilities authority to implement energy efficiency projects of the historical traditional variety that they always have. However, the proposed prioritization of emission reductions combined with the fact that appropriations resources revenue for these activities are held constant would likely result in less investment in those traditional historical energy efficiency projects and more investment going forward in other services like electrification relative to today's baseline. So diving into those direct impacts, potential direct impacts to the state budget, there are really three areas of the state budget that can be directly affected by this bill. So there's the costs that the state pays for electricity in its buildings, and its facilities across the state, just like a residential, retail consumer, and it pays for the electricity it uses. So to the extent that this bill would have an effect on retail electricity prices, that would influence the state budget. Revenue raised, and then there are two taxes levied by the state that are based on electricity consumption. One is the monthly gross receipts tax, which is levied on the retail sale of electricity. And then the other is tax levied on the gross operating revenues of electricity providers. And so to the extent that this bill would increase electricity consumption through activities like electrification and fuel switching, it would potentially increase, because it increases electricity consumption, would potentially also increase the revenue collected from those two taxes. Just to emphasize again, as proposed, it still doesn't levy any new taxes or fees or authorize new state expenditures. Any impacts to the state budget that JFO is currently identified would be caused by, again, any impacts to what the state pays for energy and the extent to which it increases electricity demand and therefore those revenue sources. So this bill kind of walks the line of the sort of bill that JFO would usually do a full fiscal note on, right? It's light on direct appropriations, expenditures from the state budget, but it does potentially have these threads that could affect those revenue sources and state expenditures going forward. So again, JFO isn't at this time prepared to comment on some of those broader economy-wide, Vermont-wide questions that other testimonies have focused on in committee, but some of the dynamics at play have similar principles involved, right? So on the topic of state energy costs, electricity efficiency programs decrease energy consumption. They decrease electricity consumption. By lowering demand, they exert downward pressure on rates. Additionally, by lowering peak electricity demand, efficiency programs reduce the cost of grid upgrades or avoid the need to perform grid upgrades and maintenance. On the flip side, electrification of thermal and transportation fuels does increase electricity demand. That exerts upward pressure on rates, right? Increases demand, increases price. At the same time, increased electric load can require upgrades to transmission and distribution infrastructure, which are costs that are ultimately passed on to ratepayers. There are other strategies that can be employed, which this bill speaks to, that can help mitigate those costs, things like demand management that can avoid those upgrades to transmission distribution infrastructure. But in general, as a shorthand, think of increased electrification, additional load, additional infrastructure costs, which get passed on to ratepayers, such as the state. Another kind of dynamic to note here is that the increased EEU jurisdiction, electricity energy efficiency utility jurisdiction that's proposed in the bill could exert downward pressure on electricity rates paid by the state through that very increase in load. If you're seeing electricity demand go up across the state, up until transmission or distribution infrastructure requirements are needed, that's increasing demand, increasing revenue going to utilities above and beyond what they require to recover their costs, and which can then theoretically be returned to ratepayers. Again, that is up until more investments are needed to upgrade the grid. And I think, there are lots of indicators out there that there will be additional spending needed on transmission and distribution infrastructure in Vermont nationally and across the New England grid in future years. So that's not to discount the very real possibility of increased infrastructure build out costs. But up until that point, right, you could see higher prioritization of things like electrification actually exerting downward rate pressure through increasing demand. Finally, to the extent that the state is able to benefit from projects that result in expanded efficiency utility jurisdiction, that could also see reduced costs to state energy expenditures, right? To the extent that this enables the state to take advantage of fuel switching programs in state buildings, that would be downward pressure on needed state expenditures to pay for state energy. However, I should note that of the potential new activities undertaken by efficiency utilities in this bill, electrification is just one. There are other activities the EUs could undertake with this expanded jurisdiction that wouldn't notably decrease, would not decrease electricity demand if you're looking at things like switching from a higher intensity fuel to a lower intensity fuel, for example, which I believe would be something that might be authorized under this bill. That really doesn't have an impact on electricity consumption and therefore wouldn't really exert downward pressure on rates. So that would be an upward pressure on rates, but without any direct benefit to electricity ratepayers. So that covers I'll pause there on I just touched on a couple of different pieces connected to state energy expenditures. The last piece is much more straightforward. It just talks about potential increased revenues from those two tax sources. I'll pause for any committee questions on the section of this review.
I don't have any questions, but I do appreciate you outlining all of the pressures. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I think, using the direct costs to the state that might arise from this bill as kind of a window into looking at the various threats at play here. This is potentially helpful.
Any other questions or comments, so far? Okay, great.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are two state taxes, i.e. revenue sources to the state budget, that are collected based on, electricity, retail electricity sales. The first is the gross receipts tax. So electricity distribution utilities pay a gross receipts tax on, a monthly basis to the state of Vermont based on how much electricity they sold, how much their gross receipts were that month. And then the other is the revenues collected from an annual look back tax, which is levied on gross operating revenues of electricity providers. So if you are looking at expanding efficiency utilities' ability to increase electrification across the state, increase fuel switching, heat pump adoption, EV infrastructure installation, all that kind of thing. All of those things increase demand, increase retail electricity sales, increase the tax base for these two revenue sources, and could increase revenues to the state. So you're seeing two kind of countervailing forces to the state budget here, one that increased costs.
Go ahead.
Sorry, it would also potentially decrease revenue from the other fuel sources and the taxes on the other fuel sources, right?
Yes, exactly.
So just like with the previous section where there are sort of changes in consumer behavior because of what kind of energy they're using, it's the same for this as well.
Right, so actually the gross receipts tax on retail electricity sales is a subset of the fuel tax, or it falls under the umbrella of the fuel tax. So you might see additional receipts from there at the same time that you're seeing fewer receipts on, sales.
Yeah, that's
Same thing.
It's a good question.
And this says S65, I don't know if it matters, but we have at least one updated version that we were looking at. Did you just use as introduced for your analysis, or?
I used the most recent draft.
You did, okay.
that I could find.
Yeah.
And so got it this morning after he.
Oh,
Yes.
so we have another draft?
There's the,
Okay,
gonna be a new draft, which I
And
believe you haven't seen yet, so.
Definitely want to see that draft. That being said, because given the level that this system is operating on, I don't know what the changes are in the new draft, but I don't know if it would change the basic.
it's
system
high level.
analysis, but yeah. Which leads me to my next point. So there are more detailed analyses, quantitative analyses that we've done to, put a firmer number estimate on direct costs or net benefits to the state budget. JFO hasn't prepared those at this time, but can do so if that's of interest.
Super. Any other questions at this point? Yeah.
It's just to ask if, if we're selling more electricity, why would that drive the prices up? It's normally when you have a system and you're selling more, it actually often drives the price down. So what are the factors you considered when you said it might make prices go up?
The one factor at play is as you increase demand, right, and increase the amount of electricity that we need as a state. Unless you're seeing a lot of new generation built within either Vermont or the New England regional grid, that could increase the need to import electricity from elsewhere, which may come from more expensive fuel sources. It might be imported across longer distances, right? So there might be fewer efficiencies in transporting. So that energy, for example, could be more expensive.
Might increase the peak.
Gotta go on the two.
I get the trends.
Yeah.
Mission part.
And and to your point, Claire, to the extent that you are increasing peak demand, which is the time in which energy is most expensive to provide, that's also driving costs up. You should note that, retail electricity rates have a lot of cost drivers behind them. The programs run by efficiency utilities are simply one, right? If you unbundle them, there's the costs of the fuel, there's costs of utility administration, there's costs to update infrastructure, right? There are many things that drive retail electricity prices. So in this fiscal note, when JFO says that something exert upward pressure or downward pressure on rates, that isn't to say it will increase rates. You would have to say it would increase rates, all else being held constant. And there's not a lot of things being held constant in the energy world these days. So.
And I do want to point out too that I feel like you had mentioned that, but you'd also mentioned that increased demand for the very reasons that you were identifying, that it also has this downwards pressure as well, like increasing the base.
Yeah.
So it was kind of doing both. There's reasons why it could do both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there would be more detailed, honestly, level of modeling that would be required. I suppose then to speak more informatively about that, other, speakers certainly can. One thing that I think JFO feels fairly confident in expressing is that, energy efficiency is energy efficiency programs are a very cost-effective way of reducing demand. I think Efficiency Vermont's most recent kind of 3-year performance report said for every $1 of energy efficiency programs, there was $1.40 of system-wide benefits. Right? I think we have Efficiency Vermont in the so correctly, that's the correct. But they're very cost-effective ways of reducing demand. And so to the extent that you switch away from those to these other programs, which might be less cost effective at reducing demand, or might just cost more, period, that might very well be an increased system-wide cost, just given how incredibly cost effective energy efficiency programs can be and how particularly successful they've been in Vermont over the last couple of decades.
Great. And I know you had your hand up, and so maybe.
No, it was like, you sort of made the point that I was,
Okay.
because I had the same question that you did, Senator, until I saw your paragraph that said, however, and you sort of clarified. So, yeah.
Right, and it's kind of, there's reasons to think that it can do both ways, yeah.
Yeah, there's kind of countervailing forces at a lot of different angles here.
Yeah.
So like I said, JFO is happy to dig in on the direct state budget impacts in more detail if the committee would like.
Great, okay, super. Any further questions at this point? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we are running a little ahead of schedule, and I don't see Alan at this point. So we are gonna take another.
We have both.
We do, yeah, I'm gonna wait.
Oh, okay, well, I don't know.
Okay, we'll take a quick break until we're joined by our next student.
I'm scared.
Now we are muted, okay. Okay, we are back from our break, I don't wanna mispronounce your last name.
In chat.
Inchak, okay, we are joined by Alan Inchak, welcome from the Public Service Department. Giving us an update, we know we've had you here before, but it was a squished amount of time, so, happy to have you back,
I
so.
appreciate the opportunity to come back, so, I'll just jump right into it, and so, I did want to just kind of revisit some of the things that I mentioned the first time I was here, just kind of expound on that a little bit. I think there are a couple of points I just want to reiterate, but I can hopefully do that fairly quickly. And then I just want to talk about some of our thoughts, concerns of the department about S65, particularly the implications for weatherization versus prioritizing GHG reductions and then affordability considerations. And then if there's time for questions, I'll try to step and give you half time. So anyway, I think I want to reiterate again that we support the urgency of climate action. We're not here to dispute that, and we're not here to dispute the value of what EVT provides to Vermonters and Charter. I think we all agree that that's a critical resource. And so I don't want to impugn them in any way. And I also think we agree that EVT probably has a role to play in any GHG reduction strategy. We've got the know-how, they know the measures, they know the trade allies and contractors, we've got the systems. I think there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram. So again, I want to be clear about that. I think the position I'm here to articulate is that we don't support the use of EEC funds, the electric efficiency charge, for greenhouse gas emission reductions. And I think, again, as I said, there are significant implications for the types of measures that will incentivize in the market. And there are some concerns about affordability of the knock-on impacts, so I'll fix that. Again, just to rehash, the grid is expensive, the context of the EEC. And so you can't have redundant systems. You need to have a monopoly utility, and in exchange for that monopoly control, they have to provide reliability, non-discriminatory access, and prudent expenditure of their grid. And so the first two are fairly easy to check up on. Outages, somebody wants electricity at their business or their home, they get it. But the third one's pretty tricky to figure out. Each utility has unique context, different resources available, different, geographic considerations, all that stuff. So one of the key ways that system operators address this and try to provide some transparency into the pricing is with a tool called supply curve. And what that does is basically you take all the resources you have available at whatever time you need the energy resource, and you stack them up. And the width of the bar is the amount of resource that particular asset can provide. The height of the bar is the cost per unit of that resource. And you stack them in ascending order, and you plot where the amount of energy resource you need is, and where that line crosses, that sets your price. So energy efficiency effectively reduces that demand need, which puts you at a lower price point, and that puts downward pressure on rates. Yeah.
This is called a supply curve,
Correct.
So that's the name of it.
Yeah, I think they're called various merit order chart or merit orders.
And these are for just, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, these are just sources that are on demand?
It could be energy or either one. All markets sort of operate under the same supply curve. And I'll be honest, it's more nuanced than that. Like there's
No, for sure. Well,
settlements and all that kind of
I
stuff.
mean, I'm thinking about this in the context of like peak demand, you gotta turn something on, what else are you gonna do? Here are your options.
Yep,
That kind of,
absolutely.
because,
Right there.
and like, just thinking about how like, we don't see in this, in the curve, like, wind or solar or hydro.
Well, these are just illustrative. I mean, this is not the ISO New England supply.
Oh, okay.
It's much different. I'm just
Okay.
trying to keep this
I understand,
simpler,
okay,
just not.
because I was trying to think like, where those other sources would fall.
Oh, yeah,
And like why they would not be included, but it's a different, they could be potentially.
Yeah, they are.
Just one.
Yeah, as far as ISO New England's concerned, they're all there, and it looks very different than this. It's much more detailed and.
Okay, I was like trying to make excuses for like why those things were showing up, but then.
No, it's a good point, it's good clarification. Yeah, purely for illustrative purposes. And so you can see the effect of energy efficiency is that, it reduces that demand, or I guess if you want to think of it another way, it inserts itself in that resource stack and kind of pushes it over so that either way, the price point falls at a lower price point. That's the value of energy efficiency, and that's the downward pressure on rates it provides for all ratepayers. And this is your base rate. I'm not talking about the EEC charging. This is like the majority of your electric bill is determined from this. So what happens if you, repurpose the EEC? Basically, you take it out of that stack and your cost snaps back. And I think in the latest annual report for EBT, for every dollar EBT spends, it returns $1.40 in avoided energy costs. And so if you take that, if they spend roughly 50 million, so if you take the 50 million out, you then need to go to the supply market and buy like $70 million worth of supply resources. So that's a problem right there. You've got 50 million that's already been paid by ratepayers that goes to something else, and then they need to pay an additional 70 million to get the energy back that they're no longer requiring. To further compound that, if you spend it on GHG reduction, we've had a lengthy exercise potential estimate for the Clean Heat or the Affordable Heat Act. And that basically said that the best way to do GHG reduction, most cost-effective way, is liquid fuels, low carbon intensity liquid fuels, and fuel switching fossil thermal to electric, so heat pumps. And that's load building. And so not only have you removed efficiency, but you've also added this other kind of load that's going to drive prices potentially even higher. And I have heard said in this committee, and I believe it's a quote from my own department, that if you increase the amount of energy that gets sold on the grid, utilities can spread their fixed costs over more units, and that will necessitate downward pressure on per unit cost. And while that is true, there's a major caveat to that. That's basically as long as you don't need to invest in more T&D infrastructure. So if you can keep the grid the same, then that's true. You can spread your fixed costs over units and units. But if you electrify anywhere near the scale that the potential study that we did identified, it's inevitable that you'll have to make T&D upgrades. You'll need bigger wires to carry all those electrons out to all these things. And so that again will create upward rate pressure. So just to summarize, diverting the EEC to GHG away from electric efficiency and unnecessarily put upward pressure on rates, and prioritizing cost-effective GHG will promote fuel switching and low carbon fuels, and the load building from the fuel switching will also put upward pressure on it because of T.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Theoretically, if the direction that we know we need to go is electrification anyway, for a lot of reasons, isn't that inevitable?
Yeah, I mean, it is, but I think there are some problems when it shouldn't be either or, I guess, would be my opinion. If you divert the EEC, you take away a major tool to mitigate those effects. And that's, I think, where we really have a problem. So I think back to my original point, we don't necessarily dispute the need to reduce greenhouse gases or that fuel switching is bad inherently. It's just this mechanism creates a problem.
There's another question here. Yeah.
I'm just looking back through the draft, and we're gonna look through another version later, but the bill doesn't. It sounds like from your testimony that the way you're reading the bill is that it fully diverts it all to electrification and greenhouse gas emissions. And my reading is that it does not. It just adds that into the mix of things that or the EDC can do.
Sure.
So I
but-
think your assumptions are an all or nothing kind of assumption rather than oh, there's gonna be some of it used for that, but some of it is still, probably most of it will still be used for the current uses, the energy efficiency uses.
Well, I think that the problem is that by putting GHG, cost effective GHG reduction at the top of the list. That immediately becomes the focus. And yes, I mean, I take your point that some of the money may stay in electric efficiency programs, but by reducing that amount at all, you start to precipitate that effect that I described. So
Yeah, I guess I would like to, where in the draft do you say, oh, is it this language right here that that with priority given this one?
yes,
Okay, so I'm just trying to, because my reading of it, of the bill, and that's the language that is precipitating your black and white testimony of like, everything's gonna go to greenhouse gas emissions reductions.
Mhm.
Then maybe we can look at that, but it seems to me that the intent of the bill is to just create another option, to create another way that they can use the money. Not an all or nothing, which your testimony kind of is an all or nothing testimony.
I mean, that's fair, but I think we already have. Fuel switching programs, which are meant to address like a more comprehensive view, and they are pretty much exclusively used for fuel switching for that very reason. So that's, I think, where my concern comes from. But I take your point. I mean,
What are those programs? The
the tier 3 programs under the.
oh, I see, oh, yeah, okay, that's,
So, and they're, I think, and to take it full circle, I think my original quote about the spreading costs out over more units sold, that's in the context of the tier 3 programs, which are fairly modest, admittedly, but it's, it's still the same mechanism, and that's sort of how they.
doesn't a lot of that tier 3 work actually get done by Efficiency Vermont, and then they just transfer the reps over to the,
Some of it does, yes.
yeah.
And doesn't the tier 3 rate pressure, isn't there significant downward pressure on rates because of tier 3?
There is, but again, it's because it's a very modest amount of fuel switching that's done, and it's fairly diffuse in this game.
The other thing that, I don't know the thought, but it's gone, but anyway, okay, thank you. Oh, actually, well, no, I got it. Because another program that comes to mind is the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act. Did your department support the Energy Efficiency Modernization? Okay, because that was, that was, actually, I would just say, like, that was a small attempt to do what we're doing now. You know what I mean? That was like, can we use this money in a more flexible way that addresses reduction of carbon? And, anyway, I think of that as very successful. But anyway, sorry. please continue.
Yeah. That's a good point. So so now getting into the substance of the bill, I think, I guess a lot of this stems from the parallels that we have seen with the Affordable Heat Act and sort of, it seems similar. And I think the key distinctions are sort of that it swaps the market mechanism for like a cost effectiveness formula to direct investment. And I think there's also the sort of unclear limits to what the end game is. And again, coming back to that sort of cost effective greenhouse gas potential is what the key driver of this all is, or the top priority. I know that the bill puts a cap on spending the 2026 levels for a couple of years and then you adjust it for inflation, but after that, it sort of leaves it up to a potential study to determine what the next appropriate level of funding is. And we've done that potential study through the process associated with Clean Heat. The department had to do the ND5 potential study, I'm sure you all remember, it's contentious and we had a lot of issues with it, but suffice to say, it was pretty clear about what the sort of lowball estimate of what the potential was, and it's like $1 billion a year potential. And I'm in no way suggesting that the PUC would approve $1 billion program, it's obviously ridiculous, but I do want to say that just to illustrate the scale of the problem that this is pointing at. It's a significant amount of money that could potentially be needed to address this. So would exercise caution there, and it's not clear how that's supposed to be addressed. I think the other piece of this is the deprioritization of weatherization. Weatherization is not super cost effective. It does save greenhouse gases. There is an efficiency component to it, so it checks all the boxes, but it doesn't do any one of them particularly well, unfortunately, which is pretty tragic because I think weatherization provides a tremendous amount of other benefits. Bill savings that, you know, can be seen as sort of economic development, is particularly true for low-income Vermonters, but really for anybody. Improvements to the built environment, mitigating toxins, manipulate like mold, all that kind of stuff, reducing air infiltration, health outcomes, the list goes on. I think we all kind of know roughly. And so deprioritizing weatherization sort of deprioritizes those things too. Isn't unfortunate consequence of that. And then I think the flip side of that coin.
Can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So how do you see it deprioritizing weatherization?
Because weatherization is not very cost effective by any metric, whether it's.
Yeah, but in this bill, I understand the cost effectiveness of weatherization. I also understand the benefits. We all love it. If we
Yeah.
do it, we have tons of money. Be
Right
great.
there with you.
How does this bill deprioritize it? Where specifically? Like I wanna see the language, which
Well,
language?
I think just prioritizing cost-effective greenhouse gas reductions, and then the second one being efficiency, like it's not cost effective, so it just will fall at the bottom of the list. It's not that they.
Oh, I see, there's nothing in the bill that says,
Yeah, it
let's
doesn't
not
say-
do weatherization,
yeah, it
because
doesn't say-
weatherization
yeah.
stops.
Right, it just because it will fall at the bottom of the order.
Okay, so
will be
because
addressed.
it's not specifically prioritized, you see it as being deprioritized.
Correct.
I see, okay.
And if, you know, QPIs for EBT to deliver this were based around cost effective GHG and then cost effective efficiency and all those things. And that would mean that weatherization would be the last used resource because it doesn't improve any of those metrics.
Well, I mean, Efficiency Vermont right now. Where does this change what is the current status of weatherization for Efficiency Vermont?
I mean, Efficiency Vermont does do a little bit of weatherization, but it's all market rate, I think, so it's.
Yeah, so this isn't changing that. So there's nothing in here that changes that.
Yeah, not really, except for the fact that, you know, it changes the relationship with the folks who do deliver weatherization, I guess, by, you know, because the services no longer fall, they're available under this umbrella. Finally, where they're not really on the electric side because the grid's already very clean, and so there's virtually no GHG savings from weatherization. You know, the electric benefits from weatherization are pretty minimal because it mostly increases the thermal sector. And so unless you have a heat pump already, which is a very rare case, you know, there is no incentive to do that right now.
Right, but I guess you're trying to make the argument that it deprioritizes weatherization, you have it written there. It doesn't deprioritize it, it just doesn't.
I guess it leaves it where it is already, but
It's
because.
status quo.
Right, but because you're addressing the thermal sector, there is an opportunity to do weatherization now, especially if like a thermal charge were to be instated.
Right, but
But
there's
it can
no
still be
prevention
small.
of doing weatherization.
No, absolutely.
Okay,
I'm
all
not
right, I just
suggesting.
wanna be clear, all right, thank you.
Yes, that's a good clarification. I'm not suggesting that it explicitly says you can't do it. I'm just saying that in the order of cost effectiveness, it will fall out of.
Got it, okay.
And I think the flip side of that is that there's also not a really specific language about affordability in here. I know there is a low income carve out and it is exempted from cost effectiveness, which I think maybe indicates that it could be used for weatherization, but I think there's also a lot of language about innovation and electric vehicles and other things that are competing priorities for weatherization, and weatherization is also on top of the things we said about cost effectiveness. It's just not sexy, right? Like it's not innovative particularly, like there's nothing. It's just, you know, really sort of meat and potatoes thing you can do for energy efficiency, and unfortunately, it doesn't fall in any of those other categories. Which I think, you know, makes the approach, particularly for low income Vermonters, a little bit more vigilant in the case. I mean, without the benefit of the electric efficiency and without the benefit of weatherization, if rates go up, that puts vulnerable Vermonters in an awkward place because they have limited options for making.
Sorry, I
It's
know
okay,
you're
most of
running out
are
of
kind
time,
of.
I know,
But
but page 12 of the
Yeah.
bill. So again, like the provision of equity and justice services, any appointed entity shall ensure equitable and just provision of services no less than 25%. So this is like new language
Mhm.
that I see as actually requiring that there be a focus on affordability. And
Well-
this is new, this isn't part of the charge currently, so
Correct.
isn't this an improvement on affordability?
Again, it depends on, the devil's in the details with that, and it's just a spending requirement. So it doesn't stipulate that it needs to reduce energy burdens or anything. It could be spent on things that actually increase energy burdens potentially if fuel switching is prioritized, for example. And at the very least, if there's no participation path and rates go up, then.
Do you really think that they're gonna
Stop.
implement things that make energy costs higher for people with lower incomes? Like, do you think
Well, if
that,
you just do the fuel switching and there's no intervention for low income people, their costs will go up regardless, whether they participate or not.
yeah, but that would be counter to what's actually in the law.
How so?
Because there's the provision of equity and justice and then targeted to residentials with customers with low or moderate income. Do you, I
Right,
mean,
but-
like,
That amount of spending doesn't compensate for the fact that rates across the board will go up. So yes, some people will get relief, but in general, everyone's costs will go up. That's what I'm trying to make on the electric side.
I don't quite see that, okay.
It's an interesting point about like the purpose. That the 25% is a carve out of spending.
Spending, yes.
And I wanna take another look at like, do we need to say to what purpose with that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a fair point, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, just a quick note on flexibility, I don't wanna belabor this, and this is an ongoing study we're still doing, but. One of the key vectors for electrification has come under scrutiny recently, and I think we've started to socialize this. Vermont is kind of the last state to take up this issue in New England. I think Maine has already moved past split system heat pumps, in Massachusetts and Connecticut have very specific rules about where they can be applied. Vermont still has sort of just a midstream program in place. But basically we're finding that unless you completely remove the legacy heating system, heat pumps aren't really a viable solution for savings or, MMBT savings, greenhouse gas reductions, anything like that. Just because of the ability for customers to continue to use that legacy system, even if it's just in like a supplementary fashion, it breaks the economics of cost effectiveness of heat pumps. And so it's not to say that fuel switching again can't work. I think there is plenty of opportunity for whole home systems, but they are extremely expensive. And that's just a problem that I have to overcome. So I think, again, to summarize, weatherization has a host of participant benefits, not sexy, not terribly cost effective, unfortunately, and it doesn't get quite as much GHG savings as just straight up fuel switching. But I think all of those benefits should still be considered. I think on the flip side, fuel switching, GHG, liquid fuels, the two key drivers of GHG reduction, represent mostly cost decrease. And there are some cases where it's not clear cut, but if you're a natural gas customer, there's no reason why you ever want to switch to heat pump, only double your heat costs. So that creates a bit of a conflict. And I think the unintended consequence of that is, it's gonna potentially put vulnerable Vermonters in jeopardy. But I think the bigger piece of it is that if it does make electrification more expensive, it makes fuel switching less attractive economically, which sort of compromises the purpose of that. And I'm sorry.
Well, we asked a lot of questions, so thank you. Super, any further questions at this point? Okay, awesome, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for taking all of our
Sure thing.
questions, appreciate that. Mr. Walker, if you would like to come and chat with us, great. Welcome.
For the record, Peter Walk, Managing Director of Efficiency Vermont, again, wearing my DEIC hat. To be very clear on the roles that we play. I appreciate Alec having the opportunity to provide the rest of his testimony as he was, had to speed through the last time. I have to say that I agree with, where your line of questioning was going. There's nothing in this bill that, would deprioritize weatherization, that would, require all of this money to go to greenhouse gas emissions reduction. It is adding to the bucket of tools we have. Provided you with some written testimony earlier this week because I knew you were gonna have limited time, but that goes through a list of measures that are cost effective under electric efficiency and thermal efficiency measures now that also reduce greenhouse gases. Right, it's not one or the other, it's overlap. It's overlap everywhere. And so and we do weatherization now. We have a units weatherized requirement in our man resources plan. Everything that we do starts with a proposed plan and then gets worked out at the PUC with the Public Service Department's input throughout the process. So if there are things that Mr. Anjak and the rest of the team would like to see, they have that opportunity. And as sort of co-regulators in that process to be able to offer alternatives, offer suggestions. We do that. That process is well established now for the last 25 years. And creates outcomes that balances all of those factors that we've gone through. So I just want to reiterate some of those points. We are still committed to weatherization. We're still committed to low income and moderate income weatherization. Over half of the weatherization that we are doing at this point in time, and 29% of all of it is low, 29% is low income, over half is low and moderate income. So we are doing in weatherization that is helping the most vulnerable Vermonters right now, working through that process. And as the ARPA dollars dry up, we will continue to do that. That's incredibly important work. The equity provisions, Senator Hardy, as you mentioned, are really focused on how do we do those whole home efficiency work for those among us who need the most help, right? And make sure that we can do and give that attention, the necessary attention to be able to do that work well. The other provision that hasn't really been discussed in that equity section is the idea of the creation of a low income EEC rate, which would further drive down costs for low income Vermonters. And so that hasn't really gotten much testimony here, but if you're talking about affordability, you gotta do two things. You gotta collect less money from people who can't afford it on the front end, and you gotta give more money to them on the back end to help them change. And this bill does both of those things. I just wanted to remind you, I think the broader point about electrification and the costs that are going to be created. You have created a climate, a climate council and a climate action plan that has said that electrification is a key path for us moving forward to be able to reduce our emissions. That electrification is going to occur whether S65 occurs or not. You are bringing additional tools to help that process along. Not changing the outcomes that you have directed to occur. So I think we need to be careful of cause and effect here. And the nice thing about having energy efficiency along with electrification is that we're really good at saving people electricity at the same time. All of the heat pumps that are on the market now are the most cost-effective ones because we've worked with suppliers directly and manufacturers to make sure that they have those available for Vermonters to buy, so they are saving electricity every time they use their heat pump. Because there are lots of more on the market that wouldn't do the job as well and would cost Vermonters more. I'll leave it there. I know you have limited time, but I just wanted to reiterate that you're not changing the way things work in a drastic fashion. You are simply setting more tools in place to help you get to where you've already said you want to go.
Any questions or comments? Yes, go ahead.
So I just want to ask you about those two sections that I asked Mr. Anchek about. So I knew the other draft, so I was looking at the old one, but I think it's page 4 on most of that. This is the language on lines 11 and 12, the priority consideration. I think that's one of the areas that he was concerned about. And I'm just wondering if you have ideas for tweaking that to make it a little I don't know, but a little
I
less
would-
concerning.
I would offer that you had priority consideration given to greenhouse gases already, and it has not been prioritized through the regulatory process in mind. It was supposed to be one of the top 4 priorities of equal weight amongst the top 4 priorities, and it has not been treated as such. And so if you want to make clear that that is a priority, that you should be very
Okay.
clear about that.
And then on the bottom of page 12, the equity provisions is, I think there is a way to make this more clear. That this is,
That it includes weatherization.
that includes weatherization and it also includes like what you do should not increase their rate, the rates of the people who are. You know, the cost of energy for the people you're trying to help.
Okay. I can certainly, I try to figure out that question. Just so everybody's clear, we don't take on there's no forcing mechanisms for people to take on projects. They only take on the projects they want to, that are going to save the money.
Right.
Right, and so.
That was kind of.
It's kind of the like basic nature of who we are, and that's in the testimony provided as well, is what I like about this bill, it doesn't change that process. We still have to have a willing buyer, willing seller relationship. If somebody sees that economic value in the change that we are helping to incentivize, they'll go forward with a project that makes sense for them. If it doesn't, they're not going to. And that doesn't change, and that's the way it exists now, and it's a good model for making sure that the customers have benefits through that process.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, just thinking about in that equity provision, if it would be useful to have any guiding language around like, we're spending this money, and it says any appointed entity shall ensure an equitable and just provision of services. To be targeted for residential services for customers with low and moderate income. I'm just gonna wonder out loud if we need something that's like, for the purposes of. Whatever.
Yeah, and I think equitable and justice,
Yeah,
also a little vague.
so anyway, I'm just speculating, but also happy to keep talking about.
I guess I'm unclear if there's a question that you would like me to wait.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm not sure that I have a clear question. So we can keep going for now.
Remember, this like the very basic, this is the start of a 1.5 year long process to determine what at the beginning point, what the 2027 through 2029 demand resources plan look like for the EUs. We will start that work in earnest this summer. It will get filed sometime in December, and then there will be the full calendar year of review at the PUC to determine what the final plan looks like. There are a lot of details that get worked out. This statute is relatively quiet on a number of details. The underlying statute is quiet on a number of details that have long-standing regulatory practice that the PUC and the department and all of the utilities understand how to interact. So I trust that can be resolved.
Fair enough. Okay, any other questions at this point? Okay, thank you so much. All right, and we do have our legislative counsel, Ellen Tchaikovsky, to come walk us through a new draft. And just to
Thank you, sorry.
just to give a little context for this, the intent with this new draft is that we're incorporating some of the ideas from S68, which we had previously discussed, particularly some of the ideas about fuel dealer registry from yesterday. So thank you, welcome.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm here on S65, draft 3.1 in March 12th, 8:22 a.m. So Last time I was here, you requested a couple of very small changes to to section 1, they're highlighted in yellow, they're primarily typos. And then starting with section 2, all the new language is, all the language is new and it's highlighted in yellow. So on page 1, oh, and I also am due in another committee at 11:30, just so you know. So on page 1, this was just, you asked to make these 2 separate sentences. So, I think that's the clarification in yellow there. I think, yeah. And then, I think. And then there was, on page 6. Similar grammar, balances in the efficiency fund shall be ratepayer funds and be used to support activities authorized in the subdivision. For the reduction of total energy across all fuel sources without a requirement for proportional allocation of costs or savings for specific fuel types. On line 19, it previously was fossil fuels and biological fuels, so now it just says, and electric, so now it just says all fuels. Similar on page 13, this is more of another sort of typo, by deleting the first sentence. Starting with in addition, does it make sense, but now it just reads, the commission may authorize an entity, etc. All right, so those are the changes to S65 as we have been working on it. So starting on page 18 with section 2, there are a series of changes related to the clean heat standard. So did you want to give any more context, or do you just want me to?
Sure, I can give a little bit more context, I suppose. So thinking about the parts that the PUC had some concern over continuing and knowing some of the intent with Act 68. So the thought was that we have this technical advisory group and the equity advisory group. But for now, since we're not moving forward with the Affordable Heat Act, or I should say with the Clean Heat Standard, then I could not think of like a reason why we need to keep those groups in existence. If I am also happy to pause them or say that they can't meet until whatever time or whatever. But for now, since I don't have a purpose for them, it removes that, it basically repeals the statutes that created them. And then there are the intent of was to repeal the clean heat standard language and then also look at the fuel dealer registry, and based on the testimony that we heard yesterday, I'm trying to modify it so that it was more functional and provided better data. Or I should say, tailored it more towards the data that is useful and built on the work that the tax department is already doing. So trying to keep all of those things in mind and drive towards the data that we want, and that would be useful. So that is the intent there. Is that helpful?
Well, so I just wanted to point out, I don't think that what I wrote matches what you're trying to do.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're gonna need to just.
It's okay. I'm anticipating that it's not the draft that we're gonna vote. And so if we need to just skip some stuff for now, say, well, this is gonna experience some more edits, that is okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, like that makes sense to everyone else. So I wrote something say, I don't, so this is where we are right now in this draft. So the first section repeals just the technical advisory group and the equity, the technical advisory group and the equity advisory group. Throughout the other sections, so the references to them are struck as well. In section 3, this is the section currently in the Clean Heat Standard that has the annual registration process, so the language here has been amended. And it does sort of reflect your conversation, so starting on line 9. Each entity that sells heating fuel in Vermont shall register annually with the commission. Except for any entity that sells heating fuel in quantities of less than 5 gallons at a time to consumers.
I just want to note that I had a good conversation with Mr. Hoda in hallway about this particular definition, and he said that I mean, we can have him in to say this also, but he was recommending that we just define it as bulk deliveries. Because that's an industry term that he said that the tax department and fuel dealers would understand. The intent of the 5 gallons at a time was an attempt to get at excluding grocery stores that sell little like camping or places that sell little camping canisters or whatever. And if you're gonna buy a 20-pound propane tank for your barbecue, that holds 6 gallons, and so saying less than 5 gallons was intended to exclude those. But I think changing it to bulk deliveries, and yeah, and I don't have a specific suggestion around language there, but just wanted to flag that it's potential alternative. Yeah, cool.
So the last sentence of this paragraph is also struck. I mean, I'm not entirely sure if you're gonna want to keep any of the rest of the language in this section. But I think the headline is that the chair is interested in having this change to heating fuel sold in the state, except for those entities that sell in small quantities. This provision currently does have this requirement that it be June 30th for a registration deadline every year. Not sure if you want to keep that deadline. It doesn't amend the required information in the next paragraph, which has already been part of the statute. So legal name, doing business as name, state, heating fuel sold, exact gallons sold for the prior calendar year.
Can I just comment on the date? The date had been a matter of discussion when we were going through the Affordable Heat Act originally, and particularly the fuel dealers did not want it to be in January because that is their busiest time. So that was sort of the off session, so to speak.
So on page 19, there is this provision that does have the PUC sharing their registration data with ANR and the Department of Public Service for the purposes of updating the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and forecast. And then it does strike the reference to the Conforming Solutions Act. It keeps the language requiring them to update the list annually, and then strikes for an entity not registered by January 31st, it requires them to register within 30 days. And that the clean heat requirements transfer to other obligated parties, and the entities shall keep their clean heat requirements for the time of the year.
Yes.
And this. I mean, this
is
whole
like
section, yeah,
This is like a half-baked idea because I didn't know what was.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Which I would say is my fault.
It seems to me that maybe you wanna change the title of this section to not be clean heat standard compliance, but rather to be something like fuel dealer registry compliance or something.
Right,
To that effect.
So standalone.
And then and just getting rid of the concept of whatever it's called, obligated parties, and just having it be registrants or something like that. Sorry, maybe I was stating the obvious, Ellen, I apologize.
No, sorry, I wrote something that is not accurate to what the mayor's goal is. So I believe what's happening is that this entire chapter is being repealed. I think he's gonna being repealed in the next version, and yes, you will need to move this language somewhere else. So yes, it would need a new title for this section yes, you'll need to make us tell me what that means to be. And yes, all other references to clean heat standard will be removed.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so like you don't even need to talk about subsection D. Or subsection 4 for that matter. Probably 5 as well. So, yes, no, the rest of this language doesn't matter because all of it's going away. There is a provision on page 22 that, so section 6. This is the language that was included about data sharing with the tax department and the Public Utility Commission and the Department of Public Service. In this version, it has not been amended. And I have started drafting what I think you might want it to say, but I guess the question is, do you want to continue to have there be tax data sharing between the PUC and the Department of Taxes and the Department of Public Service? And for what purpose is that data sharing?
My default is to say yes, but for the purpose of verification of the data that they're collecting. Does that's my initial thought on that, open to.
The aggregate fuel by type,
Mhm.
that's what we're looking for, right?
No, that's not what this says. So this is having the list of the entities that sell heating fuel as indicated by them paying the tax. So it's not specifically about the data on the fuel itself, but the entities that pay the tax.
It's like verifying the list
Yeah,
of people.
And is there? One of the things we talked about yesterday that might be potentially helpful is to get it by zip code or something like that, by area or county or.
It's coming on.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. Yeah.
so next there are two new sections
You want page 23?
on page 23.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so starting with section 7 on page 23. This is adding a new section to the to 33 VSA chapter, the weatherization and fuel tax is located, and it's adding a report on this tax. And so on or before January 15th annually, the Commissioner of Taxes shall publish a report on the fuel tax collected pursuant to 2503. Of this chapter, the report shall include the aggregated data of the volumes and types of heating fuel sold, including dyed and undyed, and the number of entities that paid. The provisions of 2 VSA section 220B shall not apply to this report, which is the provision that says reports expire after 5 years.
Can you, how is it that report may expire? What does that mean?
They stop issuing it.
Oh,
There's a general.
oh, I see what you mean. Like,
Yeah,
I was,
to get rid of reports
Oh,
that
it's-
were.
right. Sorry, I was hearing that as like, in 5 years, this data is no longer valid.
No, it's just the report because we require all those
Right.
reports, then we forget about them and agencies can do them and it's a waste of time.
Right, but for this.
Not this one.
Not this one, no, this one, we want this one to keep going. Okay. And we are gonna hear from someone from tax tomorrow, we couldn't have them in today, unfortunately. But because one of the things that I want to make sure that we include is something about codifying into statute the changes that they voluntarily made to their data collection. That was more granular, that was better data, and so would not want some, a new tax commissioner coming in to say, we're just gonna go back to the version that we had before, so let's make it clear that we want them to keep collecting that data. And so this might capture that, And we can verify that with them tomorrow.
Alright, section 8 is another report. So on, and I'm still on page 23, on or before January 15th, 2026, the Public Utility Commission, after consultation with the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, shall report to the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy and the House Committee on Energy and Digital Infrastructure recommendations on the best way to collect data on heating fuel delivery on a town-by-town basis, including the volume and types of fossil heating fuel used. The collection of this data would be to support the enhanced energy planning conducted by regional planning commissions and municipalities pursuant to 24 VSA 4352.
And that's where the enhanced energy planning lives. Yeah. Okay, so getting at this idea of the locations of delivery, like where is the fuel going? That's what this is intended to get at, because we could just ask for that, but I think it is worth taking some time to figure out like what is the best way to go about that? Is it by zip code? Is it by municipality? What kind of technology would we need? You know, it's probably good to do a little checking before we launch into that.
And to find out how burdensome or
Yeah.
it is for the fuel delivery people to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Like really hard, maybe really easy head on.
Yeah.
Starts in January.
Well, this is for the Public Utility Commission report. I would also expect if we were gonna ask them to do this, that it
Would be in June.
it would, if we're gonna do it on a manual basis, it would be in June.
Yeah, we're supposed to,
Yeah, or, yeah, right, the end of the fiscal year. When they would hopefully not be busy. But for now, that report would be January. Okay, so that's what we're looking at the moment. Yes.
I'm trying to find it in here, the first section, the original S65, I think it's on the bottom of page 12. This just an equitable thing. And we talked about adding something to the effect of, tell me what you think, for the purpose of reducing the customer's total energy costs, something like that, to make it clear that it's,
Or to like reduce energy burden. Or. Well, yeah, right, to reduce energy costs. Though. Yeah, it was, one of the things that I thought was interesting was there was a comment that no one would ever want to switch to if you had natural gas, you would never want to switch to a heat pump. And for finance reasons, that may be true. But if you were like, I'm just trying to get off of fossil fuels, you know what I mean? Like there may be reasons.
there may be reasons, I guess that's true, but this is for the lower moderate income folks, they would probably.
Right, we would probably
prioritize,
prioritize
you
that.
know, the lower
Sure.
cost.
Yeah,
unless you're south of Middlebury, you won't have that.
right, exactly, yeah. I mean, we don't have natural gas in Montpelier.
Yeah, and East
Most of the state.
Burlington.
Exactly, yeah, anywhere outside of Addison or Franklin, County. Anyway,
Maybe a
um,
little bit, that's not there.
So, sorry, so
This was
back
just
to
trying to get to the
Like, what's the
point that
point?
Mr. Uncheck got to about
Yeah.
like, oh, there's nothing to reduce the cost for low income people. And I think that language implies that, but
Yeah.
just trying to make it more clear and. I don't know, if there's the equity and equitable and just or equity and justice and service requirements. If there's a way to say that more directly, just like, this is supposed to help low income.
Yeah,
people be able to
yeah.
Pay their energy cost bill, just be like straightforward about it.
Yeah, so any appointed shall ensure an equitable and just provisions of service. And this, yeah, I'm wondering about, should we say something like to reduce energy costs or energy burden, but it could also be, to further the purpose, to the purposes of this chapter or something.
Yeah, is there a definition in statute of energy burden? Is that defined somewhere?
This is fine with the city.
Cause usually the concept of energy burden, you know, might get to it,
Can we?
we can come
We
back
could
to
do
it,
it
yeah,
and
just try to figure out how to be direct. Well, we could take that definition and
Well, keep that definition. Yeah. We can do whatever. Okay. But thank you for raising the flag that as well.
just trying to be responsive to some of the concerns.
Yeah, yeah. That's fair. Okay, any other questions or comments at this point? Okay. Wonderful. All right, thank you so much. Getting you out of here in time for your next thing. Okay. All right, thank you, team. So, just to say, I think we may try to shift some of the testimony that we have scheduled for tomorrow to try to hear some folks on this new draft. So I would like to get this out. I think the goal is by Friday. I think that is the goal. So what you see in the agenda for tomorrow may have some changes. But we are shifting gears right now. So you know, it says S57 on this next part, where we're gonna welcome Mr. McNamara back to the chair from the Public Utility Commission. It's been here a lot. We're so grateful. And specifically wanting to talk about the community solar aspect of S57. And because the committee is still interested in finding some successor program to virtual group net metering. And you had some great questions and thoughts that I want us to spend a little bit more time with. And if you have ideas, would love to hear them. So welcome.
Great, thank you, thanks for having me. Sorry, just way too many things up. Sorry, do you have slides? It's not.
We're not in any rush.
It's more my lack of organizations bothering me. I'm actually just gonna speak off the slides and then I will, slides are extremely boring anyway, and I'll send you big documents, so you're not
No
missing
worries.
anything. All right, so for the record, Ed McNamara, Chair of Public Utility Commission. And just providing some preliminary thoughts on community solar. I'm not saying like, here's the best idea ever, just throwing out different ideas for consideration. Let's start with some context. Mentioned this at least once before. Community solar is not a GHG mitigation measure. Electric rates are regressive means of advancing social policy. So I've said those before, I just want to reiterate. And I want to focus on the regressive piece a little bit as well. To the extent that you target subsidies, it minimizes the regressive impact. So in other words, if the number of people actually receiving subsidies is relatively small, the number of people who might qualify or who might, let's just say, if you're creating a low income program, you're not going to reach every single person in first year, second year. It's going to take a long time, if ever. So the more targeted the program is, the less impact on low income Vermonters who are not participating in the program. So long way around of saying, suggest that you consider community solar in two different buckets. One is a low income focus, and then the second is market. And I'll get into both as we go. And when I say market, essentially non-low income folks who can afford to participate in community solar using their own money. I will say that I'm flagging this in part because I remember a discussion several years back about group net meter, and somebody made the argument that to me didn't make sense, which is group net metering needs to have rates high enough that low income folks can participate. And to me, that's insane because then everybody else is getting a gigantic subsidy so that a relatively small number of people can participate. So again, target, break up the idea of community solar into different buckets. Also thinking about costs. So there's lots of different costs associated with the program. How much and who pays needs to be a consideration. Direct costs, those are paid to program participants. There's administrative costs as well. And depending on the program complexity, this depends on the administrative cost. You can do something incredibly complex and really cool, and might not be worth the cost. And then the last piece, it's a cost, but depending on the structure, regulatory costs. And this means also the potential for litigation, those kind of aspects as well. So just depends on the clarity of the legislation. In terms of a regulatory context, so community solar, that term is not currently defined in the statute. Different people that I talk to, it means different things. One thing I would strongly suggest is there the expectation of having at least 247 community solar projects. In other words, does each town get their own community solar project? I'm saying no, but I just flagging that. What is the granularity of community that you're talking about? And that gets to program complexity, program design, that. Another important consideration, PUC does not regulate solar developers. We regulate, or we set the prices paid to net metering customers. We don't actually oversee the solar developers directly at all. So if somebody has a complaint against, and I'm not saying this is common, I'm just sort of making sure folks are aware of the framework. If somebody has a complaint against a solar developer, we occasionally hear that and say, we direct them to the Attorney General's office because it would be an issue of fraud. We don't have the ability to actually reach in and say, sorry, your solar project didn't work out the way you thought, but let's fix this for you. We can't do that. It's not part of our regulatory authority. So I'm just going to jump in, throwing out a couple different ideas. Community solar for Vermonters with low income. So first, need a definition of who is eligible, whether that's 80% of AMI, something like that, whatever, as long as it's clarity there. I'd also suggest that you look at the appropriate privacy protections around the application process. As soon as somebody applies, as soon as somebody gets into sort of the government system, there's an expectation that it's a public record and that record is therefore, anybody can ask for that. So ensuring that there's appropriate protections around that is something that we often think about as an afterthought, and then ends up we do all sorts of legal gymnastics to try to protect folks in those circumstances. I also want to note, last year, legislature passed Act 142. It was sort of a miscellaneous energy bill, but one of the provisions requires us to develop a rate stabilization study. With, this is a quote from the Act, focused on reducing or stabilizing energy costs for low or moderate income households. So this is something that we are starting to work on now. We will have a report in December for you. It is primarily thinking about, like GMP has their energy assistance program, so Green Mountain Power Energy Assistance Program. It's providing rates for lowering rates for customers with low income. There's California's looking at all sorts of interesting things and it's implemented a couple things. So the study had been primarily focused on that. However, there's enough interesting things going on with sort of low income and solar that we'll probably be taking a look at that at least. Another aspect that I think Department of Public Service is much better able to speak to affordable community renewable energy programs called ACRE. It's the ACRE program. It's something that DPS received ARPA money, so federal money to actually implement. They had a version 1.0 a couple of years ago. There was some second round of money, so they're doing a version 2.0. They're in a great position to be able to say what that program looks like. I'm not going to try to explain it for them, but I think that's an interesting program to take a look at. The initial funding piece is always an issue, and that's of course something that you need to overcome. But it's a potential interesting model. And then lastly, it's the program design really matters. If you do something badly out of the gate, it doesn't work well. And so I suggest really taking the time and not having something highly prescriptive. You know, developing something that's highly prescriptive in the next 12 months, like generally not great policy comes out.
You only have 3 days. Adam. Drop the bird.
Remember where you gotta go on.
Right. Still my testimony. All right, so that's low income. I really suggest talking to the folks in the department. I think they're gonna have some interesting ideas about the acre, and then they of course have their whatever it's called, RE4C program as well. That has some components of low income in there. So I want to actually go back and provide a little bit of history and throwing out some market-based programs or program ideas. So there's something called Cow Power, and that was from 2006 or so. Central Non-Public Service came up with this idea. So I think it actually technically is still around. Participation rates significantly dropped because net metering was a better deal. So a lot of people gravitated towards that program instead. The program's still out there, and there's still a statutory authorization that utilities can do voluntary renewable programs, renewable pricing programs like Cow Power. So basically the idea looks like everyone's, just for the record, any customer can sign up and pay 4 cents for a certain portion of their kilowatt hours on their bill. Could be 10, I think it was 25%, 50%, or 100%, something like that. You say for every kilowatt hour I use, I'm going to give 4 cents, and that CVPS then collected that money. I think GMP is doing it now. Collects that money and uses it to help build cow power projects, farm methane things. So it was a highly successful for a very short period of time until the net metering adder went into effect in 2009 and 2010. That sort of built participation of that. So one possibility, repurpose this voluntary renewable pricing program to allow customers to support community solar projects, just pay a set amount on their bill to support community solar, or to support low income community solar participation as well. So it's a simple, incredibly simple, very straightforward. We already have all the existing statutory authority. We would be directing the utilities, we want you to do this, or directing us to make the utilities do it. Because right now, it is a utilities may, not shall. I want to talk a little bit. I've been thinking about a CSA model and community solar. For whatever reason, I started thinking of community supported agriculture CSA. So I'm definitely not an expert on this, but what I do know is entirely voluntary. Individual customers choose to support the farmer directly, and they can select the food type. It can be a meat CSA, vegetable CSA, both, something like that. They can prefer to have a local farm, somebody who has that specific product that they want that's 30 miles away or whatever it is. And then organizations like NOFA, Northeast Organic Farmers Association of Vermont, they will support, they actually have a great website that helps you connect with farmers if you're interested in joining the CSA. And I was thinking about this in part because of the idea of how do you minimize the cost drift associated with group net metering if we're going to go forward with some kind of successor program. So under CSA, an individual's choice does not impact anybody else. It is the prices at grocery store are not impacted at all by the relationship between the individual and the CSA within the farmer. So thinking about that, so two different potential models that fall out. First one, sort of CSA model 1, reflects the reality that community solar is a purely financial arrangement. It's disconnected from the customer's meter, it doesn't tie into customers' usage at all. So under this model, a developer contracts with the utility for a solar project. They go out, they get a solar project built. But then they also get people to sign up and sponsor the solar projects in the same way, and just they have folks pay in. So individuals under this model would contract directly with the developer, not with the utility. They work directly with the developer. And then the developer then provides payments, shares associated with it to the individuals that are paying in. So this, under this model, there's no connection to the electric bill. So it's not community solar in any way I've heard it. I'm stretching the definition of community solar and I fully acknowledge that, but I'm providing it as a sort of one, maybe I'm not going to call it an extreme, but it's sort of one variation that I think folks should at least be thinking about. So even though it's not applied to the electric bill, it means it also provides significant flexibility to customers as well. They can choose where that money goes. They can also choose what kind of solar, or doesn't even need to be solar. There's some small wind projects. If somebody loves small wind, they can support that. They can support projects in their specific neighborhood. They can figure out what projects they want to support and have absolute choice to do so.
One question on that, because that arrangement is sort of disconnected from what the PUC or the distribution utilities may be doing, is that kind of an arrangement currently allowable, or would, because it's monopoly, it's, there's a lot of, it's a highly regulated sector, so would you need a statute change to allow something like that to happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I remember years ago when community or group net metering first started, there was the question of, is it becoming its own little mini utility if it's providing incentives to customers based on a kilowatt hour? I cannot honestly remember, that was so long ago now. I can't remember what the resolution was on that. There might need to be a provision. There's a provision related to electric vehicle charging stations, sort of a charge pointer with those folks. There's a provision in law, I think it was Act 55 from a couple of years ago, that specifically said charge point and those folks can charge on a per kWh basis without being regulated monopoly. There might need to be some variation of that for this kind of thing. And I really see it as much more of just the financial arrangement that's entirely outside of the utility, the PUC, PSD jurisdiction. It really is private interactions between individuals and developers, very similar to a CSA concept of the individual and the farmer. So
Thank you.
yeah. Second sort of model, I'd suggest having Vermont Electric Co-op come in. So they've got something called the Co-op Community Solar Program, and they have, so under this model, DEC contracts to develop a project. So they actually go out, and it's not the customers involved to set up the community solar. It really is the utility saying, we can contract with X, Y, and Z solar projects. And then the solar developers out of it at that point. And then it becomes a relationship between the customers and the utility. So the customer can make an upfront payment to basically sponsor that solar project. And then customers receive a bill credit after that. For the life of the project, there's mechanisms to be able to, if you move, you can drop out of it, those kind of things. I don't know the details. But it's So another model is one that's currently in use. I would. I just want to caution on this though, while it's probably more along the lines of the community solar model that folks are used to. By necessity, it needs to be less feasible. Utility can't go out and just contract it because somebody wants a solar project in the neighborhood. Like that's just, the cost would be unreasonable. So you need to be able to actually allow the utility to identify the projects. It might be at a county level or whatever. Somebody would just have to look at what's the closest project to them and then try to sign up for that particular one. So this model generally more accepted or more in use, but it has some limitations compared to like the more market-based, more flexible type that I was just talking about, where it really is just the individual developer. Also, I want to note that if this is something that you're requiring involving utilities, we have a couple very small utilities, and you may want to allow some aggregation for those folks. So it doesn't have to be the individual utility that actually goes out, and each utility offers their own community solar. It might be there's an aggregation of X number of utilities, as long as customers have the ability to opt in. So again, these are not like, here's how to do it. I'm throwing out some ideas for you, some general considerations. And see where it goes. I'm curious as to what you folks are interested in and what other folks are interested in as well.
Yeah, thank you. This is helpful to have these two potential models that we could further explore, build on, and then also to just have some guidelines just in general, just like things to consider as we move forward with something. I'm hoping that we will move forward with something. I'm feeling we're not probably going to get to it by Friday, unfortunately, but it is worth talking about. It is worth doing, and I'm appreciating what you were saying about like, don't try to rush it. Good policy matters. And so I mentioned that we're probably going to be moving the schedule out for tomorrow. Just as an example, like we have this report coming in to have more testimony about the Reaper Seed program, do a little bit of a deeper dive. I may just move that to next week. Like I wanted to give that time to actually be able to chew on it and come up with something useful. Well thought out.
And thanks. I do want to just also note that not specifically testifying today on the RE4C model, at least I personally have some concerns, but we as a commission have not talked it all the way through. And so if you are going, as you sort of develop this further, I'd love to come back and give more thoughts on specific ideas that you have. At the moment, it seems like you're in the sort of searching phase.
What is the R course?
That's the department was required under Act 179 to develop the report.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And I guess I'll just say this out loud too. I am open to there being multiple solutions if we can get them to be sufficiently, owned, but I guess I'm seeing that there's maybe space for multiple solutions. So I'd rather do one really well than multiple poorly, but well, just at least acknowledge that there's space in my brain for that.
Just wanted to do a lot.
I'm gonna do all the things.
And I will just reiterate, in my mind, at a minimum, you need low income and then the market. I'm trying to fit a low income solution into a market-based solution is extremely difficult and ends up impinging either on the cost shift side or on the ability of low income folks to participate. So doing both at once never seems to work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, okay, awesome.
great.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yes, go ahead, yeah.
So not on this,
Oh, sorry.
So 65, we're gonna see a new draft tomorrow.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Are we expecting that that's gonna be Bill 31 and Bill for finance? Is that?
I'm confirming that.
Okay,
Hopefully right after this, we have some reason to believe that it probably would get Rule 31, in which case we have till Friday. If we don't, then Well,
We have
we'll
till
talk.
Friday, we have till Friday.
Yeah,
And if it's Rule
right, it
31,
just has to go
we
there.
can-
for
it
the-
just-
Well, even if it's not Rule 30.
We have till Friday in both cases.
Right.
We do, yeah.
Okay.
And then next week, finance
Yeah.
for Rule 31.
We have, yeah, we have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of next week, yeah, the finance stuff,
Finance stuff.
Finance,
We have to
yeah.
cover this.
Friday of this week, so we're good until Friday regardless of the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Does that answer?
it does,
Okay.
yeah, I just wanna make sure.
Super, and we are, well, actually, before we adjourn, I will say, just anticipating that we're gonna, go over gubernatorial appointees next week, probably either Thursday or Friday, so just be,
Okay.
so prepared for that.